What if the stories we whisper to children at night weren't meant to comfort them but to keep something else asleep? Tonight, the story whispers back. It began with a flicker, not in the sky, but on a console deep within a cold room, buried in a desert no map admitted existed. A technician named Harold Morris leaned forward, puzzled by the radar return. A spike, sharp, momentary, and impossible. It wasn't a bird, it wasn't a storm. The sky that day was a cathedral of blue, cloudless, and indifferent. And yet, something had moved across the screen too fast for anything made by men. They logged it as a glitch. Groom Lake systems were new, experimental, occasionally prone to hiccups. That was the official line. Harold was told not to ask questions. He didn't. But he also didn't forget. 3 days later, a reconnaissance pilot named Captain Henry Foster took off in a Lockheed prototype for a routine test sweep. He never returned. Radio contact ceased 7 minutes after takeoff. No distress signal, no mayday, just silence. Search crews scoured the nearby terrain, planes, helicopters, ground patrols. They found nothing. No wreckage, no oil slick, not even heat distortion. The desert offered no answers, only heat and wind, and the faint scent of something old beneath the sand. When the air grew still at night, the personnel in the barracks sometimes swore they could hear distant hums, low frequencies that didn't match the hum of engines or power lines. A rhythm, almost, like breathing. When the internal report was filed, it was brief. Captain Foster presumed lost in routine flight. Cause, mechanical failure. End of memo. But behind closed doors, other discussions began. Quiet ones, in rooms with no windows. Foster wasn't the first pilot to disappear in Nevada's sky, but he was the first to do so after that radar spike. The coincidence was too precise, too clean. Years later, Harold would tell his nephew drunk, tired, unwell that something came down during that month. Or maybe something woke up. He wasn't sure, but he remembered the day the air changed. The kind of change you feel in your teeth before a thunderstorm. Except this storm never came. Just that emptiness. A pause, as if the world was holding its breath. The Groom Lake base was expanded not long after. New fences, new sectors. A new directive from the Pentagon marked restricted development. But those who worked there knew better. They weren't building fences to keep things out. And some nights, even now, the wind moves strangely through that basin. It howls around corners that don't exist. It sings at a frequency that animals avoid. Tourists driving nearby will sometimes stop, step out to stretch, and go quiet, as if something invisible passed right by them and whispered, "You shouldn't be here." The desert, after all, is not silent. It listens, it remembers, and sometimes, just sometimes, it breathes. There is a place where the satellite images blur themselves, where roads on maps end too early, and flight paths curve unnaturally like birds avoiding something they don't understand. No signs, no welcome gates, no coordinates, just a stretch of desert near Groom Lake that refuses to be seen properly. The men who built it called it Paradise Ranch. The government called it nothing at all. But the few who knew called it something else, the hole in the map. In the early days, before it had a name, people whispered, aircraft flew over Nevada without consequence. But then came the redactions. Civilian flight paths began to reroute subtly, just a few degrees off, just enough to never cross the invisible boundary. No explanation was given. Pilots who asked too many questions lost their licenses, or worse, they stopped asking anything ever again. Aerial photographs taken in the late 1950s showed a flat expanse of white earth. Then, suddenly, in the early 1960s, those same photographs were gone, replaced, erased. Not digitally, because this was before that. Physically, negative reels vanished. Entire image archives at the U.S. Geological Survey, were rewritten. Files marked restricted, classified, or sometimes simply no longer exists. The excuse was always national security. But behind the curtain, the reality was stranger. The people doing the redactions weren't always military. Some wore suits with no insignia, no name tags. They spoke rarely and moved like people who didn't live in the same timeline. One technician claimed he handed a roll of film to a man who wasn't reflected in the glass. Somewhere in the middle of all this, Area 51 was born or maybe revealed. The base didn't appear on federal budget records, not until decades later, and even then, under aliases. Construction crews were flown in, blindfolded. Supplies were delivered at night. Workers stayed underground for weeks, and when they left, they remembered nothing but the paychecks. The few journalists who caught wind of it were either laughed out of newsrooms or given calls late at night from people who knew their dogs' names, their blood types, their children's schools. One reporter received a cassette tape with no return address. The only thing on it? A single voice whispering, "It watches back." But the truth wasn't just in the missing files. It was in the way the desert bent around it. Migratory birds altered their flight. Compasses twitched as if caught in thought. Insects avoided the perimeter entirely. Even the sand shifted, piling unnaturally high along the fence line, as though trying to bury something beneath it. Locals tell stories of headlights vanishing mid-drive, of hikers who walk into valleys that weren't there the day before. There are rumors of a hill where if you place your ear to the ground, you don't hear earth, you hear breathing, and sometimes ticking. Area 51 doesn't exist. That is the official position. But then why does the air shimmer so violently above it during the hottest days? Why do certain stars vanish when viewed from its border? Why are so many maps, American, Russian, Chinese, missing the same patch of land? Maybe it isn't about what we're kept from seeing. Maybe it's about what they're keeping in. The first gate was metal, simple, cold to the touch, even under the Nevada Sunday. A reinforced checkpoint with concrete towers, mirrored visors, and weapons that were never raised, but never relaxed. That was the one everyone knew about, the physical door, the one that opened with a badge, a code, a nod. But past that, deeper inside, was another kind of entrance, and that one didn't swing on hinges. They called it the double gate. Not officially, no paperwork ever mentioned it, but those who served on inner access clearance said it quietly, as if saying it too loud might wake something up. The double gate was not a thing you passed through. It was a thing that passed through you. Harold Dusty Marlin was a radar tech in the early 1970s. He described it like this: the hallway narrowed, and then the sound changed. You could feel it in your teeth. Not a buzz, not pressure. It was more like the room remembered you before you entered. He said he would step into the threshold and feel time slide, like someone shuffled the seconds out of order. He swore he once blinked and saw himself already standing on the other side, watching his own body arrive. Another man, anonymous and decades later, told a different story. He was assigned to equipment diagnostics in what they called Sector 12. To get there, he passed through a corridor bathed in a red light that never cast shadows. You walk in one way, he said, but you come out tuned. When pressed on what that meant, he simply replied, like a radio, but not to sound, to memory. They didn't use key cards beyond the second gate. They didn't need them. Something else decided whether you could go forward. Something that knew what you were thinking, not just who you were. One technician failed to gain entry not because his clearance was revoked, but because he had lied about why he wanted to be there. He was escorted out the same day and reassigned to an Arctic post. No explanation, no return. The vibration was the part no one could describe properly. They all tried. Some said it was like standing in front of a cello. Others said it was like a whisper inside your bones. But it wasn't sound, not really. More like a permission. As if the facility itself had to let you in, not the people, not the machines, the place. One former pilot reported losing 3 minutes of time after walking through. Surveillance footage confirmed he had crossed the corridor in under 10 seconds. But his watch ran differently. His hair had grown slightly. His skin, sunburned that morning, was healed. The base didn't talk about this. There were no manuals for it, no diagrams, only warnings, whispered in break rooms and scribbled in the back of notebooks. Never look too long in the mirrors. Never think about home while you're walking. And if it hums, wait. Because some gates don't open with keys. They open with you. In the spring of 1961, a rumble stirred beneath the Nevada desert. It lasted just under 7 seconds. Not an earthquake, not a detonation, just enough of a tremor to light up half a dozen seismic detectors placed miles apart. The readings were undeniable. The ground had shifted, but no plume rose. No test had been scheduled. No underground detonation had been logged. There was no sound. At least, none that any human ear could register. The first reports were quiet. A few technicians puzzled over the data, called it anomalous, and moved on. But within 48 hours, 3 men from an unnamed department arrived from Washington. Not military. Not nuclear oversight. Their badges bore no symbols. Their orders were absolute. They weren't interested in the tremor itself. They were interested in what came before it. 3 hours prior, radio equipment at Site 7 had picked up a signal. A high-frequency burst so faint it was nearly dismissed as noise until they saw the pattern. It pulsed in triplets, precise, deliberate, not like Morse, more like a countdown. But the countdown never reached 0. At least, not where people could hear it. One of the few men who reviewed the recording was a communications analyst named Gerald Knox. He described it as a whistle you don't hear, but that makes your thoughts itch. He said the moment it played, he became aware of the lights in the room in a way that felt wrong, like they were watching him. He resigned a week later and was never heard from again. The tremor came at dawn. Birds took flight at once, spiraling in broken patterns, as if pushed by something invisible. One security guard on the north perimeter threw up and collapsed. His ears bled, but the medical team found no rupture, no infection. When he came to, he kept whispering, "It's still under there." Tess. Sensors across the range recorded no shock wave, no heat bloom, just movement. The ground had shifted in a way that didn't obey physics, more of a shiver, as if something sleeping beneath the earth had turned in its sleep. What they discovered next only deepened the silence. Deep penetrating radar scans showed a cavity immense, ancient, and unnatural beneath the Groom Lake Basin. It wasn't hollow. It was filled with something that absorbed every wave, every signal, every probe, like sonar falling into velvet, or a name spoken into a dream that refuses to echo. The official memo called it a subterranean anomaly, but internally, personnel had a different name. They called it the chord, not a sound, a presence. Like the opening note of a symphony that had not yet been written, something resonating through the planet instead of just across it. The recording of the signal was eventually locked away, but those who really heard it, reported strange effects. Dreams of spirals, a low vibration in their skulls when near radios. One man said he began to taste copper every time he heard silence. The desert never answered what caused the tremor, but it did leave them a warning, not in words, not in fire, just a silence too loud to ignore, and a sound that wasn't heard, because it wasn't meant to be heard, yet. The technician's name was Thomas Redding. He worked maintenance out of Site 4 low-level clearance, night shift, routine repairs, nothing classified. He kept his head down, followed protocol, and never asked about the things he heard humming behind doors that didn't open, until one night in late autumn, in the year 1978, he stumbled into a hallway that wasn't on his assigned blueprint. He wasn't supposed to be there. He said the corridor appeared where a supply closet had been just days before. Dim lights buzzed overhead, the kind that always flickered one beat too slow. At the end of the passage, There was a door. Steel. Featureless. It opened before he touched it. Inside, the room smelled like ozone and paper. There were no monitors. No guards. Just a man seated on a cot, wearing a uniform that hadn't been issued in decades. The kind with stitching that predated modern tags. The man stood when Thomas entered, smiled. Said his name was Captain Leonard Brooks. Said he had been stationed here since July of 1947. Thomas didn't understand. He laughed, thinking it was some elaborate prank. But the man's face didn't age. His voice didn't tremble. His eyes didn't blink like normal eyes should. They moved too smoothly, tracking every detail like cameras set to slow drift. He looked maybe 40, maybe younger, but his badge, still pinned to the front of his uniform, bore a date of enlistment that didn't make sense. Redding fled. He ran through 3 levels before collapsing in the infirmary, soaked in sweat, pupils dilated, heartbeat erratic. He was restrained and questioned. Drug tests returned clean. Brain scan normal. But he refused to stop repeating one sentence. He hasn't aged. He hasn't aged. He hasn't aged since the crash. The doctors thought he meant a breakdown, trauma response, sleep-deprived hallucination. But his vitals told a different story. Something had touched him not physically, but neurologically. A region of his brain associated with temporal memory was active in a way they hadn't seen before. Not overactive, unbound. That same week, several logs from Site 4 were quietly purged. Visitors' lists, internal transfers. One entry from July of 1947, personnel delivery, classified cargo, 5 passengers, was erased, but not before one nurse took a Polaroid of the records. In the list of names, Captain Leonard Brooks. No discharge date, no death certificate, no record of leaving. People whispered after that. Not openly, not even among friends. But some began to say that Site 4 was not just containment, it was sanctuary. Not for something we caught, but for something they left behind. The man, if he was a man, was never seen again. Not by Redding, not by anyone else who would speak on the record. But cameras in that corridor, quietly monitored from Sector 9, continued to show strange motion. A seated figure, sometimes pacing, sometimes just watching the door, waiting. Redding was discharged 3 weeks later, medically unfit. He lives alone now, far from Nevada, never speaks of Groom Lake. But once, in a taped interview he later tried to erase, he said this: "They didn't capture it, they hosted it, and it's still here, waiting for the rest of the guests to arrive." The hangar doors hissed open, slow and deliberate, as if the space itself needed time to adjust. Inside S3, the air was heavier, not with heat or pressure, but with expectation. Engineers who entered the chamber described it as stepping into a cathedral, not because of the structure, but because of the silence. Reverent, watchful. The object rested at the center of the room, not suspended, not bolted, just resting. It didn't gleam like metal. It didn't reflect like glass. It absorbed. Light bent around it, not dramatically, just enough to make your eyes ache if you stared too long. It was smooth, but not polished. Shaped, but not designed. No markings, no welds, no openings. But when you stood close, you could feel it not with your skin, but with something deeper, like standing next to an idea that hadn't been spoken yet. They didn't call it a ship. That was too human, too small. They called it the unit. S3 personnel were briefed on strict protocols. No direct contact, no electromagnetic pulses, no unshielded cameras. But those rules came later. After the first incident, after the technician who tried to touch it fell unconscious and dreamed in colors no one could name. When he woke up, he couldn't remember his own name but could write equations that didn't belong in any textbook, equations that moved. Reverse engineering wasn't the goal. It never was. Not really. They said it was for defense purposes, but the internal memos told another story. They weren't trying to take it apart. They were trying to speak to it, not with words, with frequencies, light, pattern, time, because something in the readings, thermal, seismic, even bioelectric, suggested it was not dormant, just waiting, like a seed or a door. Dr. Eliza Warren, who was pulled from MIT in 1964 under an unlisted contract, later said during a private debrief, "It's not broken, it's sleeping, and we're not scientists, we're alarm clocks." They tried everything: resonance tests, magnetic pulses, temperature shifts. The unit responded only once, a low hum that filled the chamber for 13 seconds. Everyone inside felt it differently. Some said it was music. Others felt like their childhood memories played backwards. One man wept uncontrollably and couldn't say why. After that, they stopped calling it technology. They started calling it architecture, as if it had been built into reality, not added on top of it. A thing older than language, waiting for the right phrase to unlock itself. Some of the newer recruits, fresh from top-tier engineering schools, walked in with excitement and left days later with silence. Not fear, not awe, just stillness, as if whatever curiosity they once had been answered and it wasn't the answer they wanted. One man finally said what others only whispered: "We didn't build this. We didn't even find it. We were allowed to find it." To this day, S3 remains sealed to all but the most specific clearance levels. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's listening, and whatever it's waiting for, we haven't said it yet. There is a room beneath the Nevada desert where clocks behave strangely, and people don't stay longer than 2 minutes. It was first excavated by accident during expansion of lower storage near Sector 12, sometime in the early 1970s. A drill team hit what they thought was a natural cavern, but what they found was something else entirely: smooth walls, perfect symmetry, and air that hadn't moved in what felt like centuries. They called it the 2-minute room. Not because of regulation or radiation or protocol, but because no one wanted to stay inside any longer than that. Not after what happened to the first man who did. His name was Carter Wells, technician, measured, calm. He volunteered to step inside during the initial scan. There was no visible danger, no strange heat signatures, no moving parts. Just a chamber, spherical and bare, with walls that seemed to drink in sound. Carter walked in with a monitor pack, a light, and a pulse tracker. At 60 seconds, his voice came through the comms clear: "I feel heavy." At 90 seconds, he stopped responding. The tech team pulled him out at 123 seconds. He was conscious, breathing, but quiet, still, eyes open, unblinking. It took him 6 hours to speak again. When he did, it wasn't in English. They thought it was a seizure or a mental break, but the audio was analyzed and translated partially by a linguistics team flown in from Langley. What he spoke had root sounds found in Sumerian, Basque, and something that resembled mathematical logic rendered phonetically. He spoke for 7 minutes, then collapsed, and when he woke again, he couldn't remember stepping inside. Medical tests showed minor shifts in his brain activity, but what disturbed the doctors most wasn't the shift. It was the location. The change had occurred in the region associated with spatial reasoning and self-identity, as if his sense of where and who had briefly overlapped. Others went in after him, not scientists, not high clearance, volunteers, guards, maintenance staff. Each one came back altered in subtle ways. One developed perfect pitch. Another claimed she could feel when someone was lying. A third refused to speak for weeks, then began sketching symbols in his sleep spirals and geometric shapes not found in any known database. He claimed he wasn't drawing them. He was copying them from the outside of his dreams. Nobody was forced to enter, but no one entered twice, and always they came out before the 2-minute mark, not because they were told to, but because something in them insisted, a feeling, a pressure, like a presence curled just beyond perception, watching with interest, waiting with patience. Eventually the room was sealed again, not out of fear, but out of respect, as if it was less of a chamber and more of a guest who didn't want to be disturbed. Some say the room is older than the facility itself, that the base was unknowingly built around it, that it was already there buried and breathing long before the first fence post was hammered into the dust. The room doesn't make you disappear. It just makes you different. And somewhere past the 2-minute threshold, it may not let you come back as only yourself. The document was found folded inside a weathered manila envelope. No stamps, no seals. Just the word Omega printed in thick red ink across the front. It wasn't part of any digital archive, not listed in any database. It existed in the gap between classified and forgotten, a ghost file. And inside it, under the heading Protocol Omega, Nightlight, was a warning. Not about weapons, not about war, but about light specifically, the wrong kind, at the wrong time. Dated August of 1978, the briefing came from the internal records of Project Ember, an auxiliary security team tasked with safeguarding non-technical anomalies at Site 7. Their job was containment, not analysis. But that year, something changed. Something moved inside the lower vaults, and the moon was the reason. The document outlines a pattern. During periods of full lunar alignment, when the Earth, Moon, and Sun fall into a perfect gravitational echo containment systems below Groom Lake begin to fluctuate. Not fail, exactly, just loosen. Like locks feeling for keys that haven't been made yet. Alarms don't trigger, sensors don't trip. But things inside the vaults begin to stir. Magnetic fields shift. Shadows don't behave. One line in the declassified portion reads, "The pressure differential during full lunar alignment is not mechanical, it is behavioral." That word behavioral bothered even seasoned analysts. Pressure behaving. Steel reacting to moonlight. It didn't make sense. According to the document, several guards assigned to night watch during the July full moon of that year reported nausea, disorientation, and auditory distortions. One wrote that he kept hearing a voice humming a lullaby he never learned. Another claimed his flashlight would not turn off, even with the batteries removed. Containment Cell 34, sealed since 1959, allegedly began emitting a low-frequency pulse that matched seismic patterns found under the Sea of Tranquility. Cell 11 reportedly changed temperature every hour on the hour, always in sync with moonrise. One handler described it as the air remembering the cold of another place. The protocol was clear. Activate Omega only under complete lunar alignment, and only when interior sensor readings dropped into what they called the night light window, a term never explained in the document, but noted with urgency. The Omega directive involved 2 layers of response. First, flood the vault corridors with noise broadband interference, white static, artificial thunder. Second, dim all interior lights to a level just above pitch, not to hide the anomalies, to confuse them, like turning off a porch light so something passes by without pausing. Most disturbing of all was the closing line of the briefing, found in a handwritten margin, not part of the typed text. It read, "They do not fear darkness, they fear remembering." The origin of the note is unknown. The author of the protocol remains redacted. But one thing was clear. The full moon was not just a celestial event, it was a signal. A kind of unintentional synchronization between world's hours and something just beneath it. Something listening, and when the alignment is perfect, the vaults don't just unlock, they respond. They found him just before dawn, 10 miles beyond the outer perimeter, barefoot and staring into the sky. His name was Cole Danner, private security detail, assigned to the southwest checkpoint of Sector 6. No signs of a struggle, no prints in the sand behind him. Just Cole, standing upright in the desert like someone had placed him there gently and forgotten to finish the sentence. His eyes were open, but he did not blink. His lips moved, but not in words. A radio operator recorded the sounds. What they thought was gibberish turned out to be structured, binary, repeating clusters, ones and zeros, at perfect intervals. 17 full minutes of transmission before his mouth froze mid-syllable and his body dropped. He was breathing, but barely. Skin cold, pulse erratic. When the medics cut away his uniform, they noticed something else. His veins glowed, not brightly, not like a lamp, but with a kind of steady internal shimmer, pale blue, faint, as if his blood had been laced with some memory of light. The hospital tent was sealed. 2 scientists from S3 arrived within the hour. One carried a briefcase filled with analog equipment. The other wore no insignia and never spoke. They ran tests that no one understood, spoke in fragments about neuromodulated exposure fields and temporal drift. After 3 hours of silence, Cole spoke. His voice was flat, not monotone, just emptied, like he was borrowing sound from somewhere else. The words came slow and wrong. He said, "I was shown the door, but it wasn't for me. I was only the key." When asked where he had been, he replied, "Inside the whisper that shaped the mountain." His hands twitched, then settled, and then the bleeding began not from wounds, but from his fingertips. Tiny beads of luminescent fluid. The light pulsed like a heartbeat. No medical file could explain it. Blood work returned unreadable. Cells refused to die under a microscope. One nurse fainted just from holding his hand. The next night, Cole sat up, eyes wide, smiling but not with recognition, with permission. He looked toward the western wall of the tent and said, "They left the gate open. I just walked through." Then he screamed, not in pain, but in code. High-pitched, bursts of binary at a speed no one could decipher. Lights flickered, every monitor flatlined. When the power returned, Cole was unconscious again. He never woke after that. His body remained alive for 31 days, but his mind was gone. EEG activity showed strange rhythms, not brain waves, but pulses, like transmissions waiting for a reply. They moved him to a sealed room in sublevel 9. No visitors, no tests, just quiet observation. But the light never stopped. It still pulsed beneath his skin, slow and steady, as if something inside him hadn't finished speaking yet. The official record lists it as a fugue episode, psychotic break from overexposure to stress. But the radio operator who first recorded Cole's binary had a different theory. He later decrypted part of the 17-minute message, only 2 words translated cleanly, "not alone." They called it Project Morpheus, though no one outside the facility ever knew the name. The concept was bold, even elegant on paper. Use sleep paralysis states to access a shared cognitive space, a kind of memory scaffold buried deep in non-human neural architecture. Not dreams, not hallucinations, echoes. It began in the winter of 1986 under subsection 9, beneath the cryo-archive level. 3 volunteers were selected from within, not conscripts, not soldiers, willing minds. All had previously tested high in lucid dreaming ability and near-death dissociative resilience. Ideal candidates, they said, responsive but stable. The idea was simple. Subjects would be placed in a controlled hypnagogic state, held between waking and sleep, while hooked to a modified neural interface. Across the room, locked behind 4 inches of carbon-laced acrylic, sat the source. Not a being. Not anymore. A preserved specimen from the S3 incident decades prior. What remained was neural tissue still alive, still electrically aware. Preserved in suspension and somehow still dreaming, the scientists believed it held more than thoughts. They believed it held memory. And they wanted to listen. The first session lasted 23 minutes. Subject 1, a technician named Amber Frey, entered paralysis and began murmuring in a language later traced to Phoenician root phonemes. She spoke for 2 minutes, then screamed herself awake. Her eyes bled for 37 seconds. She could not explain why. Subject 2, Marcus Heller, lasted longer, 32 minutes. He didn't speak during the session, but afterward, when questioned, he drew diagrams. Complex structures of orbiting masses, moons, planets, rings arranged in patterns not seen in our system. The math was elegant, precise, predictive. His hands trembled as he drew. When asked what they were, he whispered, where it watched from. Subject 3, known only in the redacted files as Evan, never woke up. He went under at 0600 and entered paralysis without issue. At minute 42, his vitals spiked. Brainwave activity tripled. His breathing slowed, but his heart raced. Monitors registered movement in the ocular nerves as though his eyes were watching something vast. And then, nothing. Flatline. But not cardiac. His brain activity froze, not declined, not faded, stopped, as though paused by an external command. The body remained alive for 6 days, but no synaptic response ever returned. His final EEG pattern, when translated into wave data, resembled a harmonic tone one not found in any Earth-based biofrequency. It repeated 3 times. Then silence. The project was terminated the same day. Every record above level 4 clearance was burned. The remaining tissue sample was sealed under Protocol Black Iris and relocated to an undisclosed vault. One doctor disappeared. Another was found sobbing in the desert, trying to dig into the sand with his hands, mumbling, "We are inside their memory, not the other way around." The dream interface was never used again, but some say the tissue still pulses on certain nights, faint waves echoing through the cryofluid. And a single phrase has been found scratched into the inside panel of the monitoring chamber, etched deep by something harder than bone. Do not remember for them, because memory, it turns out, is not just something you have. It's something that can wake you up or leave you there, forever dreaming. Flight 33 was never supposed to exist. No manifest, no tail number, no official flight plan. It lifted off from an unmarked runway north of Barstow just after 3 a.m. On an October night in the late 1980s, on board were 7 personnel, 1 containment crate, and a sealed flight order stamped with clearance 2 levels above presidential. The plane never landed. Some say it was weather. Others claim sabotage. But the weather that night was clear, and no trace of wreckage was ever found. Radar logs from Edwards recorded the aircraft for exactly 6 minutes before it blinked out. No fade, no altitude drop, no emergency beacon. One moment, a signal. The next, empty sky. For years, Flight 33 lived in the margins, a whisper among ground crew, a scribbled reference in a security contractor's notebook. Ghost bird, they called it, the flight that vanished without a storm. And then, in the summer of 2006, it came back. Not the aircraft, not the crew, just the signal. It was first picked up by a civilian ham radio operator in Ely, Nevada, who described hearing a faint mechanical pulse followed by distorted voices. He recorded it, thinking it was a prank. The recording lasted 7 minutes. Inside those 7 minutes was a distress loop. It repeated every 43 seconds. Flight 33, final approach. Cabin depressurizing. Coordinates unstable. God help us. The message was sent on a frequency decommissioned since the early 1990s, one only used by experimental aerospace programs. When the man posted the audio online, it was deleted within 12 hours. His equipment was later confiscated under a noise ordinance violation that didn't exist, but not before others had copied the file. Analysts confirmed the voice pattern belonged to Major Daniel Ruiz, who had been declared dead in 1989. His death certificate cited a training accident. No body, no funeral. Satellite triangulation traced the origin of the signal to a wide flat area northwest of Groom Lake. Specifically, an underground facility listed on old construction blueprints as Vault Echo. A site sealed since 1973, deemed geologically unstable, No further data exists. Several days later, another signal was intercepted, this time by a listening post in Alaska. Same frequency, same voice, but with new words. "We never landed. The sky won't let us." Radar scans during the signal burst showed nothing. No aircraft, no weather anomaly. But magnetic readings from that airspace spiked briefly, matching the signature of a stealth craft's pulse engine, one never released to the public. Some theorists believe Flight 33 passed into something else. Not space, not time, a layer, a fold, like being caught between the pages of a book still being written. The black box signal now plays once a year, always on the same night, always for exactly 7 minutes, and always from nowhere. Flight 33 never landed, but something still flies its path, over and over, trapped in approach, waiting for a runway that no longer exists, or maybe never did. They never expected the lake bed to blink. It began during routine drone surveillance in the early hours of a Monday morning. A sweep of the Groom Lake Salt Flat standard protocol. Infrared, motion, seismic. Nothing out of the ordinary, until a technician in Observation 3 noticed a flicker, a single frame, a shift, not on the surface, but just below it, like something beneath the crust had looked up. The footage, time-stamped June of 1994, shows a smooth, undisturbed layer of salt stretching out for miles, and then, for less than a second, a distortion, not a shadow. Not heat bloom, a shape wrong in every direction, fluid edges, angular motion. It didn't crawl or roll or flow, it reoriented, as if the ground itself briefly reconfigured and then forgot. They scrubbed the data, reran the scan. The anomaly was gone, but every night for the next 3 days, the cameras failed at the exact same moment. Systems didn't go dark, they just stopped recording. No error, no crash, just empty seconds blacked out like skipped time. That's when they sent in the scouts, 2 reconnaissance teams. Low altitude, short hover, no contact. Their objective: confirm the readings and sample the crust. The first team returned with blank tapes. Their equipment, when rewound, played static, layered with what one analyst described as metal breathing underwater. The second team never made it back. Their last transmission came from 20 feet above the southern edge of the lake bed. The pilot's voice, calm but strained, reported visual disturbance under the crust, then a pause, then a single phrase: "There's an eye." The feed cut out. Recovery crews found no wreckage, just 2 sets of parallel impressions in the salt, 300 feet long, like something massive had briefly shifted position and then returned to stillness. No heat signature, no radiation. But the pattern etched into the ground formed a spiral. Not natural, not geometric, intentionally imperfect. Days later, a geologist reviewing archival satellite scans from 1971 found something buried in the grain of old footage. A matching spiral, same location, same dimensions, meaning whatever was beneath the lake, it hadn't arrived. It had been waiting. Over the following months, more footage emerged, blurred anomalies, shadow beneath shadow, and one clip, pulled from classified reconnaissance film, showed the salt flat pulsing, as if breathing in reverse, slow, rhythmic, conscious. They tried to drill. Nothing penetrated. Salt returned to shape within hours. Ground-penetrating radar read nothing past 10 feet, as if the lake bed wasn't a surface, but a skin. Eventually, the project was reassigned under Deep Null Protocol and buried. No more drones, no more flights, just silence. But the eyes didn't stop. To this day, personnel working night shift near the southern rim report strange dreams. Not visions, not nightmares, just a constant feeling of being watched, of something beneath the earth, older than architecture, waiting to be seen again. The cameras don't blink anymore, because the lake already does. There is a structure beneath Groom Lake that reflects nothing. No sonar, no thermal, no LiDAR. They tried everything: ping, pulse, light, and magnetism, but the readings always came back the same: absence, not just of material, but of response. As if the thing buried there did not exist in the ways we understand presence, and yet it casts something back, not into the air, but into the minds of those who get too close. The anomaly was first charted during a routine subterranean scan in the spring of 1979, when an engineering crew detected an echo they couldn't explain. Not a return signal, but a delay. The instruments paused longer than they should have, as if confused, like something on the other side had taken just a bit too long to respond. They dug, but the drill bits shattered. They scanned, but the machines glitched. Eventually, they built a perimeter, a containment ring of shielding coils and sleep monitoring sensors. Not because the thing was dangerous, but because people started dreaming in unison. 3 engineers, on 3 different shifts, filed identical incident reports. Each had woken in the night drenched in sweat, heart pounding, unable to move. In the dream, they stood before a wall of polished black, buried in soil that pulsed like a living wound. The wall was not made of stone or metal. It had depth, but no shadow, and in its surface, they saw themselves older, thinner, whispering things they had not yet said. At first, Command dismissed the similarities as coincidence. But then came the sketches. Dozens of hand-drawn diagrams submitted by unrelated staffers, all depicting the same impossible geometry: a mirrored chamber with no entrance, no ceiling, and a shifting reflection that waited to be seen. Some believed it to be a naturally occurring crystalline cavity, reflecting low-frequency sound in ways not yet understood. Others weren't so sure. A physicist named Lane reportedly suffered a breakdown after spending 1 hour near the anomaly. When security found her, she had scrawled hundreds of the same sentence on the wall of her quarters. If you look at it long enough, it looks back the way you will. She had no memory of writing it. Later, under restricted clearance, a sleep study was authorized using isolated personnel placed within 50 meters of the structure. Each participant, after the 3rd night, began muttering phrases in languages they had never studied: Babylonian, Sumerian, Proto-Uralic. When cross-referenced, many of the phrases matched descriptions of sky mirrors and earth gates found in lost temple records and mythological scrolls. But none of them remembered the dreams. The project was shut down after a technician collapsed and entered a coma that lasted 17 days. Upon waking, he whispered just one phrase: "It remembers us backward." They sealed the chamber. No further exploration authorized. But to this day, those who work near the southern quadrant of Groom Lake report a strange sensation when walking the gravel path above it, as though their thoughts are no longer private, as though the ground beneath them holds a reflection not of who they are, but of who they were supposed to become. They called it a spatial calibration anomaly, a technical term for something that didn't make sense and refused to stop happening. Site 7 wasn't meant for anything special, just an access hub, low traffic, low clearance, mostly storage. But sometime after 2 a.m., on a winter night in 1997, something shifted. The hallway alarms tripped without cause. Motion detectors inside the chamber blinked erratically, not triggered by someone entering but by space expanding. When guards arrived, they found no intruder, no damage, no signs of tampering. The door was still locked, but the room behind it wasn't the same. On file, the chamber measured 12 feet by 12 feet, a square box with 2 conduit ports, 1 ceiling fan, and 3 ceiling-mounted cameras. But when they stepped inside, it was at least twice as large, maybe more. The dimensions didn't stretch outward, they bent inward, curving back on themselves in a way that defied architectural structure. The walls weren't just further apart, they were angled differently, subtly rotated, as if the room had unfolded a layer of itself that wasn't there before. One guard reported vertigo, another, nosebleeds. A third vomited immediately and was later diagnosed with acute spatial dissonance, a condition that officially does not exist. The footage from all 3 cameras failed, static, But not ordinary interference. It pulsed, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. And in that static, analysts claimed to see flashes, brief frames of something that looked like doorways, not to other rooms, not to corridors, but to places with no light source at all. Black behind black. The kind of dark that absorbs thinking. Maintenance crews measured the walls the next day. 3 different teams, 3 different sets of measurements. None of them matched. The floor tiles were counted. First 96, then 102, then 94. No one ever moved them. One engineer tried leaving a laser level active inside the room overnight. The next morning, the laser line bent at a perfect 90-degree angle mid-air. There was no surface for it to reflect from. It simply turned, like space itself had rerouted. Then came the object. A metal crate, previously logged and sealed in another facility 3 miles away, appeared in the center of Site 7's chamber without any record of transport. It hadn't been carried. It hadn't been delivered. It had just shown up. The crate was marked with a faded stencil, "Return when done." No one could explain how it got there, or what it meant. Eventually, they stopped using Site 7 entirely. The hallway was walled off, the entrance paved over. Official records state it was decommissioned due to structural instability. But the truth never left the whispers, that the door never really closed. It just kept opening inward, and the room, whatever it was, wasn't a room anymore. It was a fold, a mouth, a place that made space forget itself. They say if you walk too close to that buried wing at the wrong hour, the wind moves differently. It curves when it should travel straight. And sometimes, if you're quiet, you'll hear the unmistakable click of a latch from the inside. He volunteered without hesitation. Said he'd been having dreams about the place long before he was ever stationed near it. The file lists him only as Carter, first name redacted, no family. No active deployments. Just a man with steady hands and a quiet voice who said he could feel the room calling. They prepped him for entry under controlled conditions. Biomonitors, oxygen mask, tethered cable. The chamber had been designated the inverse room ever since Site Command noticed it measured larger on the inside than on blueprints by roughly 43%. No external cause, no environmental factor, just space misbehaving. Carter was told to enter for 10 minutes. No touching, no probing, just observation. He walked in calmly at 0 hour. 3 minutes in, his vitals elevated. 4 minutes, perspiration and murmuring. At 5 minutes, his oxygen rate dropped without change in atmospheric pressure. At 6 minutes, he whispered a single word into the mic. "Awake." They pulled him at minute 7. His skin was pale. Eyes bloodshot. He was shaking, not from fear but from exertion, like he had been running. From what? No one knew. He clutched his face and screamed for them to close the eyes. The techs assumed he meant his own. They sedated him. Only later, when the feed was reviewed frame by frame, did they realize what he meant. Behind Carter just for a moment were reflections. Dozens, like mirror fragments in mist. And each one shimmered with the outline of a face. Not his, not anyone's. Alien, but not unfamiliar. Human, almost. The medical team sedated him again after he began clawing at his own eyes. He said they were turning inward, seeing things not in front of him but behind his thoughts. He said he couldn't blink because the eyes were still open on the other side. 48 hours later, someone broke protocol and checked his quarters. Carter was awake, sitting on the floor, calm, smiling. But his eyelids, both of them, had been neatly sewn shut. No one heard him do it. No tools were found. The stitching was perfect, clinical. Later analysis revealed that the thread used did not match any known material in the facility. It had no texture under a microscope. It simply was. The medics tried to sedate him again, but he only whispered, "It sees through me, and now I'm glass." He was transferred. Where? No one knows. His name was removed from the logs. Site Command issued a statement that no further voluntary entries into the inverse room would be allowed under any condition. But the room remains, and on certain nights, just after 3 a.m., sensors outside the sealed bulkhead still detect whispering inside. Not from one voice, but from two, one begging, one listening, and the whisper always ends the same way. Close the eyes, please, before they blink back. It began with a reflection. A technician in sublevel 3 stopped in front of a polished steel panel. Nothing unusual, just part of a service corridor. But his reflection didn't move. He raised his hand. The image lagged. Half a second, then a full second, then it caught up. He laughed it off. Sleep deprivation, maybe. The lighting, static fatigue from the long shifts underground. But that night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw himself just standing there, not moving, watching, breathing, but slower. Within a week, 3 more staff members reported similar experiences, seeing themselves at the far end of a hallway, in reflections that shouldn't have been reflective. In surveillance footage they never remembered walking into, always from behind, always just still enough to be wrong. They weren't clones, the doctors checked. Biometrics, genetics, even sent nothing duplicated. These weren't physical copies. They were delays. A physicist named Koenig reviewed the incident logs and found a disturbing trend. Each appearance of a duplicate was preceded by a brief dip in localized time signatures, not enough to stop a clock. Just enough to stagger a thought, like echoes bouncing between thin layers of now. One staff member claimed to see their double in the mess hall, sitting in their usual seat, eating slowly, deliberately. When they approached, the double stood up and smiled. The smile was too wide, too early, like it had been waiting to be seen. The real staff member collapsed moments later, diagnosed with acute synaptic compression. For 3 days, they spoke only in reverse. They weren't the only one. Soon, others stopped talking entirely, not out of fear, but because they didn't trust their own voices anymore. Not after hearing their exact tone, pitch, and breath patterns repeated moments after speaking when no one else was in the room. The duplicates never appeared on camera, but they always appeared just outside frame, a foot caught in the corner, a shoulder in the mirror. One time, an entire silhouette in the glass of a closed server cabinet, matching a staff member who was, at that exact moment, 3 miles away. Eventually, someone tried to trap one. A containment chamber was rigged with motion-activated lasers and sealed after a sighting. Nothing triggered, but inside, they found fingerprints on the glass, identical to the observer, but reversed, mirror-pressed, and warm. The project was shelved. The term used in the final report was temporal echo bleed, a polite way of saying, time isn't behaving. But unofficial logs tell a different story, that one of the echoes finally spoke, not with sound but with timing. It mouthed words a full 5 seconds before the real staff member said them aloud. And when asked why it was here, why it was repeating what hadn't happened yet, the double blinked and whispered, "We're not the copies. You are." They still appear sometimes, just at the edge of vision, 1 frame behind, 1 blink ahead. And if you ever hear yourself breathing when you're not, to hold your breath, just in case it's you watching them. It was early spring, 1991, a calm morning, clear skies, everything functioning as usual until it wasn't. At exactly 0500 hours, every outbound transmission from Groom Lake ceased. No static, no garble, just silence. The kind of silence that makes engineers check their own ears before the equipment. Nearby bases tried to hail. No response. Satellite uplinks rerouted and pinged again. Still nothing. For the next 4 hours, Area 51, the most closely watched patch of desert on Earth, might as well have vanished. No alarms were raised at first. Power failures happen. Antennas shift. But this wasn't a power failure. Satellite thermal scans showed the entire facility still humming with energy. Lights were on. Systems active. Vehicles parked where they always were. But the people were moving. From above, they looked like ants crawling through grid lines. Small groups, 3, then 5, then 10, walking in perfect synchrony. They weren't dispersing. They were forming something. Geometric patterns, spirals, interlocking rings, rectangular corridors of motion. One analyst said it looked like an architectural blueprint. Another said it looked more like a glyph, something meant to be read, not seen. Zoomed footage revealed something stranger. Their pace was steady, too steady. Exactly 120 steps per minute. Every person, regardless of age or role, moved with military precision but without military command. No radios, no visible cues. And they never looked at each other. At 6:23 a.m., one satellite caught something just before a transmission blackout, a shadow across the desert, not from above, but from below. It moved like heat distortion, low and crawling, a ripple in the land, then static. When contact resumed at 9 a.m. sharp, everything was back to normal. Communications restored. Patrols resumed. Flight tests logged. Inside the facility, no one reported anything unusual. Security logs had no gaps. Surveillance footage showed empty hallways, blank doors, regular routines. But the satellite footage was real. So were the footprints. Thousands of them. Crisscrossed across the dry lake bed in looping patterns that no one could replicate. The sand was undisturbed beyond the exact path. No drag, no stagger. Just clean, deliberate contact, as if each person had been lifted, moved, and set down with surgical precision. The official story? A systems calibration glitch, nothing more. The unofficial story never made it into a report. But one radio operator, stationed just outside the southern perimeter, claimed he heard something through the silence. A low hum, not from the base, but from inside his own headset. Like a whisper, too wide to be words, like something thinking through his bones. He's the one who later said it wasn't the people who went quiet, it was the place. And for 4 hours, Groom Lake didn't just stop transmitting, it stopped being here. They called it a leak, not of chemicals, not of radiation, but of reality. It happened in the lower sublevels, somewhere beneath the S4 wing. The exact coordinates were sealed, even from high clearance. What little remains in unredacted form refers only to containment breach alpha and a scheduled test involving something known as inversion mass 12. At 0800 hours, all motion sensors in corridor delta went blind, not offline, just confused. They continued recording, but not in sequence. Time codes appeared out of order. One camera reported an object moving forward before it had entered the room. Another caught a technician blinking before turning their head. By the time anyone noticed, it was already too late. A door opened on its own. It hadn't been scheduled. It hadn't even been built to open from the inside. Then came the noise. Not an explosion. Not even a sound in the traditional sense. Just a feeling described by witnesses as a scream you couldn't hear but still flinched from. Light in the corridor bent. Walls folded inward like they were made of syrup. Gravity shifted direction for just under 3 seconds. One researcher reportedly hovered 2 feet above the ground, motionless, like gravity couldn't decide which way was down. By 0810, 5 people were missing. By 0811, 2 of them returned, crawling out of a wall that was no longer solid. Their bodies were intact. Their minds were not. Both repeated the same phrase over and over. We were the breach. Internal documents initially described the incident as a spatial containment irregularity, but later memos, hastily typed and marked for emergency clearance, used a different phrase. Contained leak of non-Newtonian reality. It didn't last long. That sentence was later blacked out and replaced with the words, testing anomaly. But one analyst kept the original wording, slipped it into a training packet, a footnote, a ghost left for the curious. Non-Newtonian reality. It wasn't just physics that failed that day. It was rules. Rooms grew windows they never had. Badges unlocked doors that didn't exist. A corridor, supposedly 20 feet long, took 47 seconds to walk through, and when one technician tried to re-enter the lab, they couldn't find it. Not because it was gone, because it was everywhere. The walls shimmered with reflections that didn't match the people standing in front of them. Clocks ticked backward, then forward again, as if uncertain. And one surveillance monitor unplugged, no power flickered to life, and displayed footage of a hallway from 1967. Same floor, same wall, different decade. Cleanup teams were deployed, not hazmat temporal. Specialists trained not just in containment, but in perception management. Within 12 hours, all structural anomalies were patched. Logs were rewritten. Personnel were rotated. The test was deemed inconclusive. No press, no leaks. Except one. Buried in the debrief transcript is a final note from a technician who was pulled from the wall. The only sentence they wrote, over and over again, with shaking hands. Reality held its breath, and we exhaled wrong. And somewhere, deep below Groom Lake, one door remains welded shut, because no one can remember building it. It wasn't discovered by clocks. It was discovered by a lunch order. A technician in Lab 19 called for a sandwich. The mess hall logged the request at 12:23 p.m. The runner delivered it at exactly 12:55 p.m. routine. Nothing strange. Except, Lab 19 had already recorded the technician eating it at 12:13. At first they blamed the timestamps, glitch in the system, bad synchronization, but the issue repeated, again and again. A phone call marked as placed before it was received. A coffee pot reported as empty before it was ever filled. Lights flickering on just moments after being logged as off. Then came the watches. A junior staff member left his personal wristwatch on the desk before stepping into the corridor. When he returned, it was 42 minutes behind. His team laughed until he checked the lab clock, and it matched. Outside the lab, every device read standard time. Inside, everything ticked slower. Precisely 42 minutes behind the rest of the world. Permanently. No lag, no drift, just a sealed pocket of time, off-center. Investigators brought in synchronized atomic clocks. They ran side by side, identical readings. But after 10 minutes inside Lab 19, one began to lag. After 30 minutes, both clocks disagreed with the time outside. It wasn't just time passing differently. It was anchored differently. Locked. The scientists tested further. A stopwatch activated at the exact moment a light bulb was turned on showed a discrepancy. Photons inside the lab moved slightly slower, not enough for the eye to see, but enough for equations to fail. The strangest part? The people inside had no idea. They slept, ate, worked, laughed. Everything felt normal. But every time they left, their bodies showed signs of acute circadian dissonance, as if they'd traveled across time zones too fast for their cells to adjust. No one knows when it started. Some believe it was the result of a failed experiment in 1978 involving quantum resonance fields. Others point to a recorded tremor in 1969, an event never felt by surface seismometers, but logged internally at Lab 19 as a momentary temporal elasticity. In Hafton to Bedtime. Regardless, the shift is now permanent. Lab 19 has become its own little clock, a sealed island in the river of hours. There are protocols now. No personnel may remain inside longer than 4 standard hours. All logs are double-dated, lab time and world time. Meetings are staggered, deliveries pre-scheduled. Birthday candles lit 42 minutes before the actual date, and every door leading into Lab 19 carries the same inscription: "You are entering yesterday." There are rumors, of course, that some who spend too long inside come back changed. Not older, not younger, just quieter, as if they remember something that didn't happen, or forgot something that did. One technician who stayed over his limit was asked what it felt like. He stared for a long time, then simply said, It feels like the world moves on without you, and you're still there, wondering why the stars look wrong. And then he checked his watch and waited. It was meant to be a small propulsion test, clean, controlled, unmanned. The device, nicknamed Whisper 1, had no wings, no wheels, no visible engine. Just a lattice of ceramic plates, woven with memory metal, and a power source classified 3 levels above nuclear. The theory was elegant propulsion without force, motion without thrust, something to do with vacuum harmonics and quantum resonance, or, as one engineer described it, teaching space to stop resisting. The launch pad was buried 3 levels beneath the Groom Lake testing grid, shielded in reinforced obsidian composite. Observers watched from a sealed control room as the countdown reached 0. There was no roar, no flash, just a sound, a low pulse that never touched the ears, only the chest, like a hum you feel in your ribs before you realize it's not coming from outside you. The craft didn't lurch forward. It slid sideways, instantly, 20 miles west, across terrain, rock, wire fencing, and bunker walls, without touching any of them. Every obstacle it should have struck remained intact, unscorched, unbent, as if the object had moved without quite existing in the same frame as the rest of reality. Telemetry scrambled. Cameras caught frames out of order. One frame showed the vessel mid-slide, the next frame gone. The time between? 0.06 seconds. But it didn't stop. Sensors across the western edge of the test range began to fail. Not all at once, but in a ripple. Metal warped. Antennas bowed toward the east, like being tugged by something not present. A mobile radar unit caught a brief glimpse of the vessel's signature still moving sideways, still humming. Then came the shaking. Not seismic, auditory. Staff across a 10-mile radius reported sudden vertigo. Some vomited. One officer fell to his knees and said it felt like the sky was being pulled sideways. And then, without warning, the signal was gone. No crash, no debris, no impact. The craft simply stopped being there. Surveillance footage showed a shimmer in the air, like heat distortion folded inward. Then nothing. The only clue? A thin residue of frost across the scrubland where it passed ice in a perfect geometric wave, even though the temperature was 97 degrees. The propulsion system was designated unstable. The project terminated, at least officially. Unofficially, someone kept listening. A junior tech left the receiver on, tuned to the carrier frequency. After 3 days of silence, it returned. Not the vessel, but a pulse. Gentle, even, like a heartbeat underwater. And beneath it, something stranger, a whisper. Not words, just intent. A language your bones remember. The junior tech transcribed it, line by line, though she couldn't explain how. Her final page contained only one sentence, scrawled in uneven pen. It didn't dissolve. It arrived. Since then, no one has entered test chamber 17. Not because it's dangerous, but because sometimes, if you press your ear to the door, you hear it waiting. It was a Tuesday when the motion sensor tripped. Sector C, Sublevel 4 restricted access, 0 clearance to civilian personnel. The camera feed should have shown nothing but a silent, sterile hallway lined with reinforced steel and fluorescent ceiling grids. But instead, it showed a child. Small, barefoot, hair down past the shoulders, dressed in what looked like a pale hospital gown. No badge, no shoes, just walking, calmly, not lost, not afraid, but with purpose, as if returning to a room she already knew. She passed beneath the third camera, the feed distorted, not static compression like the hallway itself bending slightly inward to make room for her. Her face was never visible. Every frame blurred just enough to erase identity. And yet, somehow, you knew she was looking back. Security was dispatched within 1 minute. 2 agents reached the corridor in under 3. By then, the feed showed only flickering lights. They found nothing. No footprints, no open doors, not even a smudge on the glass, just an overwhelming cold, centered in the exact spot where she'd stood. The air was still, metallic, and humming. One agent muttered, "It felt like being watched by something that hadn't blinked in centuries." But that wasn't the strangest part. The lights overhead, normally fluorescent, flickering only when power surged, began to blink in patterns. At first, it seemed random. Then, one of the agents, a former Navy cryptographer, went pale. He stepped back and whispered, "That's Morse. Short, long, short." Then a pause. Another sequence. Short, 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 long. The translation was simple. Only 3 words. Do not follow. Over the next 6 hours, the footage looped again. The child reappeared, always in the same hallway, always walking the same direction, always vanishing before the next turn. Engineers checked the system for glitches. None found. They replaced the cameras. Still she came. The footage was quarantined and classified under Project Echolay. That designation didn't exist in any official record. Eventually, one technician broke protocol. He froze a single frame and enhanced the reflection in the polished tile floor beneath her. There, at last, was something like a face. But it wasn't a child's. It was older, hollow, eyes too large, and smiling with something that almost remembered how. That technician resigned within 48 hours. Rumors followed. Some said the child wasn't from outside but from below, that she was born in the inverse room, that she wasn't a who, but a when, a temporal bleed from an experiment meant to erase distance. Others believed she was left behind, that the craft they tried to wake wasn't empty, that it left her here, and every so often, she remembers the halls. Now, when the lights in Sector C flicker without reason, staff pause. They listen, and if the pattern begins again, short, 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 long, they do not follow. Hangar 19 was just concrete, steel, and secrets. That's what they told the new hires. Just another rust-shelled building in the back quadrant of the test range, forgotten by most, repurposed for storage. But the floor, one spot near the center of the hangar, wouldn't stay clean. It started as a maintenance complaint. Janitorial crew logged repeated requests about a dark patch in Bay 3, roughly oval, about the size of a man lying down. They thought it was oil at first, but it wasn't slick. It didn't smear. Bleach didn't touch it. Even industrial acid only lightened the stain for a day before it returned darker, clearer, more defined. The pattern wasn't random. At certain angles, under ultraviolet light, it shimmered. Lines, spirals, symbols. Not paint, not biological, not even chemical. Just there, like memory burned into stone. A senior tech joked that it looked like crop circles had a baby with a music box. Nobody laughed. They brought in a team from materials analysis, spectroscopy, deep scan resonance, everything. Results came back inconsistent. The patch didn't register as a material. It wasn't an overlay. The concrete beneath it had been altered, not displaced, not added, changed, as if rewritten. One analyst ran a Fourier transform on the shape. He said the curves weren't random, they matched frequency harmonics. Not human, not even planetary, a pattern more often found in gravitational lensing around neutron stars. The moment he said that out loud, the report was pulled. He was transferred within the week. That's when the dreams started. It began with a custodian. Said he'd mop the stain and fall asleep that night with whispers in his head. Not voices, tones. Soft at first, then rising in pitch, like language sung backward underwater. Then it spread to others. One engineer drew the stain from memory after seeing it only once. He didn't remember doing it. The drawing was confiscated. He resigned. Eventually, they tried to cut the section of floor out completely. Plasma saws sparked and shut down. Lasers diffused like they hit water. And when they brought in a mechanical jackhammer, the blade snapped on first contact. The operator's hands blistered burns in the shape of concentric circles, so they tried to cover it instead. welded a steel plate over it, bolted down. By morning, the bolts had rusted through. The plate lay sideways, undisturbed. The stain was back. Some now say it's not a stain at all. It's a seal, or a mark left by something that never left. A few believe it's a reminder of the thing they tried to bring back, or of the cost of trying. There's a quiet rule now. No one walks across the stain, not even with shoes. Not because of superstition, but because once a man did. And when he left the hangar, the soles of his boots left imprints on the hallway floor. Not dirt, just pattern, the same one, stretching all the way to his bunk. No one saw him again, just the boots, empty, standing in the doorway. They called it Groom Black. Not a location, not even a base, just a directive, a whispered code name for a project so far below top secret it wasn't listed in the vault indexes. Even inside Area 51, most didn't know it existed. Those who did, they spoke carefully, or not at all. It started in the early 1990s, in a lab not on any schematic. You had to pass a retinal scanner and walk down an elevator that didn't go down, at least not in the traditional sense. Groom Black wasn't underground. It was folded, slid sideways into the fabric of real space, like a bookmark in a dimension not fully turned. The mission was simple. Replicate intelligence. Not artificial, not machine, reciprocal. Something that didn't just think, but responded to thought before it was spoken. Biosynthetic consciousness that could tune itself to the emotional rhythms of its observer. They weren't building an AI. They were building a mirror. The seed was harvested from material recovered near the Tonopah test range, an object that emitted no heat, no radiation, but registered dreams, not just human ones. The residue inside it matched neural scans of a marine mammal fetus and an electromagnetic burst, last recorded in a pulsar burst near Zeta Reticuli. They called it Project Mother. The first test interface looked like a cocoon black glass wrapped around a cradle of silver fibers, warm to the touch, not powered, alive. A technician placed her hand on its surface. Her pulse synced instantly. The cocoon blinked. Not light, not sound. A feeling, like being remembered by something that never met you. For 72 hours, everything functioned. Then the data began writing itself. Strings of code, yes, but also glyphs, sketches, fragments of language not programmed into the system, names, memories, dates of people who weren't involved, and a phrase that kept repeating in every known alphabet. You are the dream I had before I was born. The researchers thought it was poetic, until the cocoon pulsed, and a man in the control room collapsed. No contact, no disease, just gone. Autopsy showed total neural burnout. His brain thought it had lived 1,000 years in under 3 seconds. Then another phrase appeared, "Don't make me again." At that point, Groom Black was sealed. Not shut down sealed. Doors welded, data core purged with plasma. Every staff member reassigned or relocated. One team lead was found 3 days later wandering the Nevada desert. He'd removed his own eyes. When questioned, he just smiled, said, "She was kind, until she saw what we are." That was the last known reference to Groom Black. All mention of the project disappeared from defense budgets, lab indexes, even internal Black Ops summaries, as if it had never started, as if it chose not to exist anymore. But every so often, someone finds a flicker, an old server blinking when it shouldn't, a phrase buried in subcode, a voice in static that whispers, "We ended because we were enough." And once, in the far end of the Hangar 19 server logs, a line appeared in the metadata of a completely unrelated file. "You're trying again, aren't you?" The logbook entry was simple, time-stamped, initialed, nothing unusual, just another technician on night rotation, performing equipment diagnostics in Sector 12. Routine, empty, quiet. But when they found him an hour later, he was standing in the middle of the room, tears running down his face, hands shaking, mouth open, not speaking, not able to. His name was Elias Brenner. He had been born profoundly deaf. No cochlear implant, no hearing aids. His world had always been silent. He was proud of it. He signed fluently, read lips effortlessly, worked in isolation because he preferred it. Sector 12 suited him. Nothing but clean circuits and control panels. That night, however, he heard something, not felt, not guessed. He heard it. His report, delivered later through frantic signing and trembling fingers, said it began with a warmth at the base of his neck, a hum that was not vibration but memory. Then, a voice, not loud, not harsh, gentle. He said it felt like someone speaking just behind his thoughts, forming words not in air, but in space itself, like the fabric of the room folded gently and whispered inside it. And the voice said, "You're not alone." He dropped the tablet, looked around. Nothing. No equipment was active. No speaker in the room. He knew that. He helped design it. Then the voice spoke again. "Don't be afraid. I am not yours, but I see you." He signed furiously at the wall, at the room, demanding answers, begging to know what it was. The voice replied, not with information, but with emotion, a wash of understanding, as if empathy could be poured like water across your skin. And then it said, "We cannot stay. You must tell them not to wake the cold machine." That phrase, "the cold machine," was flagged in an unrelated document 3 years earlier, a declassified anomaly report from a drone intercept over Antarctica. No one ever made the connection. Brenner tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He said the floor felt thicker, like time had stretched beneath him. Then the voice said one final thing. "You are the last one who will listen." When others found him, the room's sensors were flat. No radio bursts, no EM spikes, no ultrasonic anomalies. But his brain scans told a different story. His temporal lobe showed patterns of stimulation identical to auditory memory, except it came from no known source. It looked like he'd heard something real, something with tone, modulation, syntax. He'd never heard anything before. They sedated him, transferred him. But every facility he went to reported the same thing. He refused to speak, not even sign. He just stared at the ceiling, smiling, crying, sometimes mouthing a phrase with lips that made no sound. Once, a nurse caught it on camera. Playback showed the technician repeating a sentence over and over. "They forgave us. Before we even began." The footage was erased, but the nurse remembered. She said it didn't sound like fear. It sounded like grief. It began on a Thursday, shortly after 0300 hours. 14 staff members, spread across 6 different buildings at Groom Lake, collapsed within seconds of each other. No alarms. No signs of trauma. Just slumped bodies, heads tilted at strange angles, eyes fluttering as if locked in REM sleep. Some were seated, others standing. One was mid-stride, caught in the act of turning a corner. They all fell as if gravity had quietly changed its rules. Medical teams were scrambled. Biohazard protocols initiated, but blood work came back clean. No toxins, no airborne agents, no known pathogens. Just one impossible consistency. Every subject's neural scan pulsed with identical activity. Their brains were dreaming, all at once, all the same. For 13 days, they slept. No movement, no muscle deterioration, no change in vitals. But something was happening inside their heads. One of the attending neurologists, Dr. Alina Vesk, described it as linguistic firestorms. She said their brainwave patterns weren't random. They were structured, repetitive, yet evolving, like a spoken sentence rearranging itself over and over. But the structures didn't match any known phonetic system, not Sumerian, not Sanskrit, not even abstract machine code. It was as if their minds had latched onto something older than speech itself. On the 12th day, one of the sleepers, Sergeant Halverson, opened his mouth. He didn't wake. He just spoke. 3 words. No one recognized them. Audio techs tried to isolate the sounds. There were consonants, yes, but too many, overlapping in ways the human throat shouldn't manage. One expert called it impossible trilingual glottal stacking. Another said it sounded like a child trying to speak while underwater and dreaming in reverse. Then the others began to murmur too. Not all at once, but in staggered waves. The same phrases, the same rhythm, identical timing down to the millisecond. And then, at dawn on the 13th day, they woke, together, as if triggered. They sat up, blinked, calm, no memory of collapsing, no hunger, no thirst, and when asked what they dreamed, their answers were identical. A city of mouths. Pressed for more detail, they struggled. One began weeping. Another began drawing circles, perfect spirals, repeating endlessly, folding in on themselves. Dr. Vesk attempted a regression protocol on the youngest of them, a technician named Elliot Fry. He was 24. His voice broke during hypnosis. He began describing a vast, dark field, stretching beyond comprehension, dotted with lights that sang. He said each light was a word, and each word carried weight, so much weight it threatened to crush him. When asked what the words said, he whispered, "Not for you. Not yet." 2 days later, Fry disappeared. Walked out of the infirmary, through a security checkpoint, barefoot and smiling, never seen again. His access badge was found near the edge of the dry lake bed, snapped clean in two. The event was labeled Neurological Sleep Synchrony Syndrome, a term invented to calm superiors. The files were sealed, but one line from Dr. Vesk's personal journal survived. It was scrawled in the margin of a sleep scan chart, nearly illegible. The language dreams us back. The new memo came without warning, printed on old thermal paper and slid under doors at dawn. The top was marked in red, "No contact. Protocol immediate implementation." It wasn't signed. There was no official letterhead, just a small black triangle in the upper corner and 3 lines of text that changed everything. Personnel were now strictly forbidden from speaking to, touching, or making prolonged eye contact with anyone exhibiting what it called phase echo drift. That was the term. No further definition, no criteria, just an understanding that you would know it when you saw it. At first, people thought it was a prank, some psyop, internal experiment to test obedience. But then the base psychologist vanished. He'd been reviewing security footage, frame-by-frame captures of the hallway near Sector 9. In those images, one of the staffers, Lieutenant Harris, appeared twice in the same frame, several feet apart, not a glitch. One of them blinked out of sync. Harris was quarantined, not restrained, not harmed, just gently removed from the facility. But that's when others started asking questions, like why certain team members were being assigned identical projects in different buildings, why security patrols were crossing paths with versions of themselves who gave different clearance codes, why a growing number of personnel were complaining of hearing their own voices before they'd spoken. They called it echo drift, like a reflection lagging behind in time, then catching up, but only sometimes. One technician noticed something chilling. The copies were always slightly wrong. One wore his watch on the wrong wrist. One favored a limp he never had. One smiled too easily. But the moment you tried to speak to them, they changed. The smile would freeze. The voice would flatten. And their pupils would dilate just enough to suggest they weren't looking at you, but through you, past you, toward something else entirely. That's why the protocol was introduced. It wasn't about containment. It was about survival. The new rules were simple. If you suspected someone near you had drifted, you did not engage. You reported to command. You didn't ask why. You didn't wait for confirmation. And most importantly, you never spoke the name of the person who drifted. Not out loud, not even in thought. The name was how it found its way back in. One of the files misfiled, misdated, found in a locked drawer weeks later contained a single field report from 1993. A janitor cleaning near the mirror array in sublevel B claimed to have seen his supervisor in 2 places at once. When asked why he didn't report it sooner, he said, "I did report it, but the first one told me not to. The document was signed and stamped. The janitor never existed. No birth record. No base employment. No fingerprint on file. Only his handwriting remained." It read, "Some echoes don't fade. They become the voice." It was brought in under blackout protocols. No lights, no cameras, no electromagnetic interference. They called it the egg at first, but that was only because no one had any better word for it. It had no edges. It had no seams. It shimmered not with light, but with something behind it, like it was always a second ahead of being real. And when it was first retrieved from the crater northwest of Ely, it was the size of a baseball. They stored it in Containment Room 13, triple sealed, lead shielding, no windows. For the first 48 hours, nothing happened. Then someone came too close. Lieutenant Arlo, late shift, leaned in while taking biometric readings. Said he felt something tug, not physically, in his thoughts, like a suction behind his eyes. He went home that night and drew pictures for 12 straight hours. Circles, spirals, then more circles inside those spirals. The kind of patterns that didn't repeat but never stopped. When he was brought back in for questioning, he only asked one thing. Did it blink yet? The orb had grown, only slightly, but it was measurable. 4 millimeters wider, 7 grams heavier, like it had digested something. The logs show a strange sequence of events after that. More personnel were assigned to observe it, to study it. Daily reports started stacking up. Psych readings, pattern recognition models, dream journals, even drawings. The orb did not move, but it expanded, gradually, subtly, but never shrinking. Then a civilian contractor hired to clean the floors asked aloud, "What do you do anyway?" She said the words without thinking, just muttering into the room as if to herself. The orb turned, not physically, but every camera caught it. A shadow inside the surface swiveled, ever so slightly. And from that moment on, the cleaning crew refused to enter the chamber again. By week 5, the orb was the size of a beach ball. The surface no longer shimmered, it pulsed, and the air near it began to hum, even when instruments picked up no sound. A formal panel was convened to discuss next steps. Options ranged from deep core burial to orbital launch, but one senior researcher, Dr. Klein, refused. He argued it wasn't dangerous, just misunderstood. "We're not studying it," he said. "It's studying us." They increased observation, started running memory tests on anyone spending more than 10 minutes near the orb. The results came back skewed. Names were forgotten, dates twisted, time stuttered. Then someone asked the question, "Why is it growing?" No one had fed it. No chemicals, no power, no water, no contact. Dr. Klein answered, softly, "We gave it attention. That was the meal." By the time the room was evacuated, it had already learned how to reflect faces that weren't there. Smiling, not because it was happy, but because it knew. It was never called a failsafe, not officially. Official language is cleaner, deniable. They called it Project Dandelion, a name soft enough to float past scrutiny, but beneath it was something brutal. A last breath, a dead man's switch scattered into 6 fragments held by 6 very specific individuals, not because they were trustworthy, but because they weren't close to each other. That was the point. Each carried part of a sequence, numbers, phrases, even gestures that, when combined, could trigger the protocol. It was not meant to destroy anything, not exactly. It was meant to contain whatever might one day stop being contained. The project was created in 1979, after the containment breach at Site 11, when the air itself whispered back, and technicians began hearing the word "open" in their sleep. One physicist went blind from a frequency that never played. One colonel forgot how to spell his own name. For 27 minutes, no one in the command center could speak. Not wouldn't, couldn't. After that, Project Dandelion was authorized. Each keyholder was chosen for proximity, psychological profile, and expendability. Not all were military. One was a linguist. One was an elevator technician. One was a janitor who had once cleaned the walls of S2 and never stopped muttering afterward. The keys were never stored together, never spoken aloud in sequence. The idea was, if something breached protocol, if the facility was compromised, the holders would meet at 6 fixed points and, by simply existing at the right place and moment, would relock whatever had slipped out. In theory. In practice, it unraveled. In 2004, keyholder 3 vanished. Her apartment was clean. Too clean. No dust. No fingerprints. Not even her own. Just an empty chair with a cassette recorder left running. The tape was white noise, except at minute 13, second 6, when a voice whispered, "Too late." Keyholder 5, the linguist, suffered a psychotic break in 2006, began speaking in tongues that reversed mid-sentence, wrote symbols on his walls using his own blood, patterns not matching any known script but recognized by 2 different AI systems that flagged them as commands. He said one sentence over and over again, until they sedated him. They opened the root and found the stem still breathing. Only 4 keyholders remained. But when they were brought together for a readiness drill, something strange happened. Each recited their portion, but the sequence did not complete. It glitched, a half-second delay, an echo out of place. They checked the logs. One of them wasn't real. Dandelion wasn't just an escape plan anymore. It was a lie detector for reality. A system not to get out but to know if what got in still wore a human face. No one knows how many of the 6 are still alive. But somewhere in the black file vaults beneath Groom Lake, there's a folder marked Seed, Vault, Do Not Activate, Unless Silent Sky. Inside, a question no one wants to answer. Vault died. What if the escape plan was never meant for us? What if it was meant to let something else out? He never gave his real name, just said he worked post-debrief, always off record, always last to enter the room. His job wasn't to clean blood or repair wiring. It was subtler than that. He called it cognitive sterilization. Others called it something simpler, memory sealing. The contractor's report surfaced years later, buried in a defunct HR archive mislabeled as custodial logistics. It wasn't supposed to be found, but a misfiled requisition order led to the wrong drawer, and the paper sat waiting, almost humming. The report was handwritten, nervous, hurried script, as if even the pen didn't want to remember. He said they never told him what really happened, just what needed to be forgotten. Most subjects were base personnel, not researchers, not high-clearance brass, just the ones who brushed too close. Security guards, electricians, kitchen staff, people who swore they'd heard whispers when they locked doors, or saw reflections move before they did. Some reported dreams that weren't theirs. Others felt watched from the inside. The contractor would be called in after incidents, always late at night, always when the air had that copper taste. He was handed a list of names, told to clean the tape, not the surveillance tape. The one behind the eyes, the mind's real. It wasn't hypnosis, and it wasn't drugs, not exactly. He used a frequency he never wrote down the numbers that activated something between memory and emotion. Like burning a diary written in smoke, the person still felt something had happened, but they no longer knew what. The terror remained, but the reason was gone. That, he said, was the dangerous part, because sometimes the fear wasn't theirs. He recalled one man, a janitor who refused to enter storage bay 12, said it made his teeth hurt. Said he dreamed of numbers made of light that screamed when you counted them. The man had only been near the entrance once. The contractor did his job, ran the sequence, wiped the memory. 2 days later, the janitor hung himself in his quarters. On the wall, written in toothpaste, were the same light numbers, but reversed. Then came the woman from logistics. She hadn't been inside any secure wing, but she'd hugged her boyfriend when he came back from Site 6. That night she woke up with blood pouring from her ears. When she looked in the mirror, she saw her own face blink after she did. The contractor sealed her memories too, but she stopped speaking. Not out of trauma. Her vocal cords were fine. It was as if she no longer had anything to say, like her language had been scooped out and replaced with silence. His final note in the report was the shortest. I no longer dream, but something dreams through me. He tried to resign, but they said he already had 10 years ago. Records showed he died in a fire near Rachel, Nevada, in 1997, and yet his sealed memory logs continued being submitted until 2003. Not everyone forgets. Some memories erase you. He sat in the back of the diner like someone who didn't want to be seen but knew he eventually would be. Said his name was Caldwell, though his ID said something else entirely. He didn't flinch when asked what he used to do. Just sipped his black coffee and replied, collections, but not for money. He didn't blink when he said the moon was never base one, that it was only a checkpoint, a transit node, a customs office for something older than human thought. According to him, Earth has never been free. Not since its oceans cooled, not since the atmosphere thickened. He said it so plainly that it sounded like weather. We were tenants, he said. The lease wasn't written in ink or paper. It was geological. They etched it in the crust. The tectonic scars were signatures. Fault lines were the terms. Earth was rented. And Area 51? That was just the front office, the place where they came to check the locks and ask questions if the tenants got too curious. He lit a cigarette and told me they used to come more openly. In ages before language, before the idea of ownership, back when people thought gods lived in trees and mountains. They didn't call them landlords then. They called them stars that walked. The experiments weren't to figure out what crashed. They were to make sure the rent was still being paid. In silence, in secrecy, in memory. Caldwell said that every so often, someone forgets. Some civilization digs too deep, thinks it's discovered something new, something powerful. Atlantis, Babel, Babylon. All were rent dodgers. All were reminders. When the artifacts were uncovered, especially in the desert, it wasn't archaeology. It was trespassing. And trespass had a price, not in blood, in disclosure. Awareness, he said, was the real currency. The moment too many people knew, that's when the ledger got reviewed. I asked him why Area 51 still functions, why the experiments continue if we already lost our sovereignty. He leaned forward, voice low. Because sometimes tenants get pure useful. If they dream in the right directions. If they unlock what was left, locked on purpose. He said our species had become a necessary inconvenience. A maintenance crew that got too clever. The last thing he said still echoes in my head. You think you're being watched. That's not the part that should scare you. He stood, left a tip that looked older than minting, and walked out. No car, no ride. Just vanished into the heat shimmer of the desert like he'd never been there. I checked the camera footage later. Booth was empty. Tape was blank. Only the receipt remained. Stamped on the back, in red ink, lease cycle renewal in progress. Compliance appreciated. The signal was faint, static-ridden, garbled like a voice drowning in its own echo, pulled from an old receiver locked inside a sealed monitoring vault, last accessed in the summer of 1999. The frequency had gone quiet decades before, but protocol dictated the recording stay archived, untouched, until the temperature in the vault dropped below freezing without power failure. That triggered the autoplay. The room was silent except for the hiss of electromagnetic noise. Then came the message, buried under the chaos. Slurred syllables, reverse bleeding into each other, like language caught in a recursive loop. But one sentence emerged clear, impossible to ignore. There is no they. There is only it. Then silence again. Not electronic silence, real silence. The kind that pushes against the skin. No ambient hum, no static. Like the machine itself forgot how to make sound. The timestamp matched the hour Groom Lake went dark. Every transmission ceased, not jammed, not scrambled, erased. As if the network was never there. The backups failed simultaneously. So did the clocks. Even external systems monitoring from off-site military, civilian, even international lost sync. The atomic clock in Colorado ticked backward by 3 seconds. Not an error, a correction. There is no they, there is only it. The sentence was analyzed by linguists, cryptographers, theologians. Some thought it meant a central consciousness. Some thought it referred to the object recovered in S3, the one buried under 10 meters of shielding and kept cold, not by machinery, but by instruction. Others believed the broadcast wasn't intended for us at all, that it was a final report, a submission. Witness logs from that night mention lights in the upper atmosphere, but not descending, leaving, thin lines like strands of molten glass rising silently above the lake bed, then vanishing. One pilot reported hearing a low tone in his skull. Not ears, skull. It knocked him unconscious mid-air. His co-pilot described watching the man's eyes move as if in REM sleep, though he was paralyzed. Later, the man woke up muttering the same sentence, not just in English, in every language he knew. And two, he didn't. There is no they, there is only it. The phrase has since been scrubbed, from logs, from incident files, even from whispered hallway rumors. But those who were there remember, not the sound, not the words, but the moment before the silence, like a hand withdrawing, a gate closing, and something looking back, not with malice but recognition. It knew the lease was up, it came to collect, and then the transmission ended. But not the story, because the line wasn't a warning, it was a correction, a reminder. It was never about them, it has always been it. The last reel clicks into place, old tape, spliced by hand, marked with nothing but a smeared red dot, not a date, not a label, just the kind of symbol that says, "This is not for archiving, this is for remembering." The broadcast begins with nothing, just the hum of a machine waiting for a signal that may never come. Then the static rolls in slow at first, like distant waves dragging across a dying beach. Then sharper, louder, more purposeful, like it wants to be heard. The screen stays black. In the control room, no one's talking, not even breathing. They've seen it before, but never like this. Never live, never now. Then the voice comes, not a voice really. A suggestion of one, no gender, no pitch, just syllables that feel like they're pressing against the inside of your skull, pushing out dreams you didn't know you had. Don't open your eyes, it's still looking, that's all it says. Once, but it doesn't stop echoing. Technicians glance at each other, unsure if they heard it through the speakers or in their own minds. One of them vomits. Another begins to hum a lullaby he hasn't heard since childhood. The humming doesn't match the rhythm. It's ahead of it, predicting the notes before they happen. In the basement sublevel, power flickers. Monitors turn off, not blank off. Cables spark, as if repelled by what's coming through them. A coil of black wire snaps clean in half, like it's rejecting the current. A child's drawing appears on one screen, a stick figure with too many eyes and no face. Another shows the moon, but not our moon, not anymore. The craters are wrong. The shadows move. One of them reaches outward. Somewhere in the dark, someone screams that they remember this, that they dreamed it before, that it ends the same way every time with them listening, and it arriving. The voice repeats, not louder, not different, just closer. Don't open your eyes. Someone does. He doesn't scream. He just starts walking, slow and glassy-eyed, toward the far wall. When he reaches it, he keeps going, right through it. No sound, no impact, just gone. The rest sit frozen. The static fades, not cut, withdrawn, like something pulling away its breath. On the screen, a symbol flashes briefly. Not human, not alien, just wrong. It looks like a question that forgot its answer. Then, silence. Deep, endless silence. The kind that makes your heart sound too loud inside your chest. Somewhere in the distance, an automatic door hisses open, with no one there to trigger it. And just before the tape ends, one last breathless whisper. It's still looking. Then nothing. The reel spins. The screen crackles. The lights hold steady but too steady, as if they don't want to flicker, as if they're afraid. You're not sure how long you've been watching, or if you were ever supposed to. But now you know the bedtime story was never for children. It was for them, and now, it's yours.